This is chapter 4.4. Let's continue on talking about this drug using lifestyle. Even when individuals are motivated to stop using drugs, when they expose themselves to risk factors, and those risk factors can include old friends, old attitudes, ways of thinking, lack of productive activities like regular work or school, the risk is reoffending is high. Now, I got a term for this that doesn't come from the textbook, but it's very applicable here. This web of relationships that can kind of pull you towards crime, pull you towards drugs and falling back into old habits. This is called a sociological term of social embeddedness, meaning you're kind of tangled. You have these social relationships in which you're sort of entangled, friendships and people you rely on and people you like to hang out with, people that you care about. That these relationships and with people can keep you where you're at or pull you back to where you used to be. And so that's an important part of understanding this drug using lifestyle and why it tends to have a certain stability over time, lasts over time. Because this web of relationships will tend to kind of keep you where you're at, or keep, another way of thinking of it, as a path that you're on, keep you on the path that you're currently on. The trajectory is another term that you'll see used in criminology as well. So we know that's important, especially for people who are struggling with drug dependencies, is that these old entanglements, these webs of social relationships can pull you, make it difficult to escape your drug dependency. Now, they talk about different models. The first one here is the enslavement model. Individuals become forced into a life of crime and drug abuse, either because of social situations such as poverty or from a personal condition such as a physical disorder. Criminal activity and drug abuse exist together, arising from a common adverse set of circumstances in one's life. So this is basically kind of a hardship model, or a deprivation model, that if you come from a harsh, deprived background that's lacking in a lot of positive opportunities, that you may sort of find yourself, and especially if you've got certain challenges, difficulties, individual difficulties that make it a real challenge to escape from these negative forces, that you might get pulled on this path towards criminality and drugs, and that they kind of, again, go hand in hand. They're sort of appear in the same social circumstances together, and so you see the drugs and the crime, going hand in hand in this, in the that individuals involved in one are likely to be involved in the other. So it's kind of a strong terminology here to talk about enslavement, and to use terms like becoming forced into the life. But again, the idea here is that disadvantage can lead to problematic, troubling adaptations, a lifestyle which is not the most positive. Another model, deep predisposition model. According to this model, drug abusers have already been involved in criminal behavior prior to initial drug use. A predisposition towards criminal activity is increased by the fact that criminals exist in social subcultures which drug use is readily acceptable and encouraged. So here you have kind of a model that the crime comes first, the criminal activity, and it really be delinquent activity. When you're a fairly young kid, you kind of get in trouble. Maybe some contact with juvenile justice, and that you're actually sort of, it's that kind of bad behavior that you'll see among teens or preteens before they've been introduced to drugs, illicit drugs, and that kind of thing. So, and you'll see here, I think I've got a note below, that you do see that this delinquent behavior often does come before the drug use. But then the idea here is that the criminal behavior, delinquent behavior, kind of gets you pulled in with other rebellious types of individuals into gangs or delinquent peer groups, who then not only encourage you with the delinquent behavior, but also encourage you with the drug use. And so it becomes kind of a lifestyle thing, encouraged by friends, by peers, by your social circumstances. Now, finally, this intensification model. According to this, drug use tends to to perpetuate a life of crime. So here this kind of sees the drugs as the driving force. Criminal careers have already begun in the life of the individual, but the degree of criminality is intensified by one's involvement with drug use. So, so again, it might be that drug dependency drives you further into crime. The need to get quick cash to pay for drugs. This is a potential here where drugs are driving thing, or maybe you're getting pulled into the drug gang, where the potential profit, the possibilities of getting money quick from drug dealing may pull someone further into this world of drugs. In this case, more the focus is selling it. Now, I realize that a lot of these people who are selling are using the drug as well, so it's not like it's one or the other. Now, this intensification model, it can account for two basic conclusions that come out of the research. Number one, that criminal careers typically begin prior to drug use, so typically the crime comes first, but it's a little bit misleading the way that the textbook puts it. Criminal career makes it sound like, something a grown-up is doing. The criminal behavior first begins typically among children, among they may not even be teenagers yet, but certainly by the early adolescence, these kids are already committing crimes, and then the drug use and heavy drug use or drug dealing comes later. So don't be misled by this term criminal career. We're really talking about early delinquency that's starting the ball rolling here. So just keep that in mind. I'm using the textbook's terminology, criminal career, but it's kind of misleading though. And number two, criminal activity declines substantially during times of drug abstinence. So here you can see some evidence that there indeed is kind of a causal connection, where if you can set the drugs aside, if you do have a problem with addiction and you're able to beat that at least temporarily, then moving away from the drugs also tends to reduce criminal activity. So there is a certain correlation, hand-in-hand quality to this drug use, especially, drug abuse and dependency and criminal behavior. There's a correlation there, and it's real, and some of it does seem to be cause and effect. Next page here. Research finds a strong correlation between drug use and drug delinquency. So strong, drug use is often blended with other behaviors to create delinquency scales. So what we're saying here is if you're doing a study on a group of teenagers and you ask them, have you done X, Y, and Z crimes, and then you ask them have you done X, Y, and Z drugs, you find really high correlations among these questions. If they say yes to one, they're very likely to say yes to another. And so if answers are really similar like that, then if you study statistics, you'll learn that those sorts of questions can be sort of summed together. They can be blended together to make what they call a scale. You may have heard this from research methods, where they'll have a measure that's based not on one question, but maybe 10 questions that are all blended together to give you an overall score, maybe an overall delinquency score. And some of those questions will be about drug use. So that just shows that these things go hand in hand so much that they will, in the statistics, blend them together because they're strongly correlated. Research shows that up to half of both perpetrators, up to half of both the people committing violence, but also victims of violence, are intoxicated at the time of crime. Usually we're talking about alcohol here. It could be other drugs too, but more than anything else, it's a legal drug, it's alcohol, up to 50%. So that shows the important, correlation anyway between alcohol and other drugs too. I'll use alcohol again as the leading example because it's the biggest one. But this could be true of some other drugs too, especially, and I'll hold off on other types of drugs for a moment here. But that's a big number, up to half. That shows that alcohol and violence, there is definitely a correlation there. Concerning drugs and crime, the problem with statistical data is that cannot tell us what is causing what. That's kind of, at the end of the day, it's hard for us. We can come up with these theories and explanations and things we've been going over in this chapter, but based on stats, it's kind of hard to know what's causing what. It's much easier to know that if you see this, you tend to see that, that there's a connection, a correlation, that they for some reason go together a lot. Not all the time, but they go together a lot. And so that's easier to say than what's causing what, because it's a limitation of our data. Do drugs, okay, so then they kind of get towards the bottom line here, these major questions. Do drugs cause crime? Of all psychoactive drugs, either legal or illegal, the drug with the highest potential for causing aggressive and violent behavior is alcohol. That's from the textbook. I absolutely agree with that. The circumstances tend to be psychopharmacological. Big word there, just meaning that the alcohol has an effect on your brain, and your brain controls your behavior, so the alcohol's influence in your behavior. So yes, alcohol does appear to contribute to be a big deal when we're talking particularly about violent crime, about violence. Most of the criminal offenses that are associated with illicit drugs are related to either cocaine, either crack cocaine, usually crack cocaine over powder, but it could be powder too, heroin, and methamphetamines. And the circumstances tend to be economically compulsive. Yeah, these drugs can occasionally have this pharmacological effect where they're affecting your brain and then your behavior. But I might be over concluding a little bit here, so don't quote me on this, but it seems to me that the evidence tends to point towards if a drug is going to affect your behavior, affect your brain, it's probably going to, other than alcohol, it's probably going to be most of the time going to be these drugs that crank you up, stimulants that crank up your system, and that would be cocaine, that would be crack, that would be meth. So you can think of, we'll get into talking about sort of uppers and downers and that kind of stimulants, that sort of thing. But it's the stimulants, it's the things that crank up your system that are probably going to have a psychopharmacological effect, on the brain. But a lot of these crimes, say for example like heroin, which tends to make you really sleepy and peaceful and not prone to be violent. Well, if you need your heroin and you're really, really addicted to it, well, you might be willing to go out and commit some violence, commit some crimes to get money to pay for that expensive drug that you feel that you need so badly. So they have a point here when they're saying that these harder drugs, a lot of times these harder drug users are committing crimes to get money, or to get the drug one way or another by any means necessary. And you can see here, this is just from the textbook that shows how often the drugs are in the system of somebody who gets arrested. These are male arrestees. People have been arrested for various crimes in U.S. cities. Now you can say, oh, that's old data right there. I included this one even though it's old data because some things don't change from year to year. Certain patterns stay stable, and this is an example of one. It doesn't really matter what year you're looking at. You're going to see similar numbers. You're going to see that here you got these major cities, but regardless of the city, a lot of people who are arrested for a crime have marijuana in their system. Significant, big numbers. Cocaine, also big numbers, but not as big. Heroin, smaller, but they're there. Meth, smaller. Multiple drugs, if you're talking multiple drugs, then that's those numbers are pretty significant there. So, but you can look at what's the takeaway from this graph? Well, you can see that marijuana has the highest numbers. And you can say, well, what's going on there? Because marijuana, we don't really think of that as being the type of drug that would cause somebody to commit crimes. It's, it kind of has a kind of a mellowing effect on people. So what's the deal here? Well, again, this is an example of how drugs and crime often go together hand in hand, but it's not necessarily that the drugs are causing you to go commit those crimes. Now, if you're committing those crimes out of addiction, yes, but again, marijuana is not famous for driving people to go out and commit, violent crimes or whatever, desperate crimes to get money. So, what this does suggest is that there's this deviant lifestyle that a lot of criminals use drugs a lot along with committing crimes, but it's not necessarily that the effect of the drugs is causing the criminal behavior. Sometimes yes, but sometimes no. I'll stop right there and we'll continue on in the next segment.